It's very interesting and a great deal of fun. As a matter of fact, working in pictures has taught me so much about other industries.
She was one of Hollywood's biggest stars, glamorous, powerful, and unforgettable. Joan Crawford ruled the silver screen with her beauty and talent. But behind the fame, her life wasn't so perfect. She had drama with her family, fallouts with her friends, and a public image that didn't match her private struggles. So when she passed away in 1977, people expected a grand farewell. But what really happened? Hardly anyone came to her funeral. No big celebrities, no huge crowd, just a quiet goodbye. How did such a huge star end up so alone? Join us as we go back to the beginning and uncover the full story. A rough start in life. Joan Crawford was not always called Joan Crawford. She was born as Lucille Fay LeSueur in San Antonio, Texas. Her family roots were mixed, coming from French, English, Dutch, and Irish backgrounds. But life wasn't easy from the start. Her father, Thomas LeSueur, left the family when Joan was just a baby, only 10 months old. He moved to another town to work in construction. This left Joan, her mother, Anna, and her siblings to struggle on their own. Later, her mother married a man named Henry Casson, who ran a theater called the Ramsey Opera House in Oklahoma. Little Joan, who liked to be called Billy, spent her childhood watching performers like dancers and singers on that stage. She loved it, but for a long time, she didn't know that Casson wasn't her real father. Her brother later told her the truth. From a young age, Joan dreamed of becoming a dancer. But one day, while trying to escape her piano lessons, she jumped off the porch and cut her foot badly on broken glass. She needed 3 surgeries to fix it, and she couldn't go to school or take dance lessons for a long time. Life threw another challenge at her family in 1917, when her stepfather was accused of stealing money. Even though he was found not guilty, he couldn't find work anymore. So, they moved to Kansas City, Missouri. There, Joan was sent to a Catholic school called St. Agnes Academy. But when her mother and stepfather separated, she had to stay at school as a working student. Instead of spending time in class, she spent most of her day cleaning and cooking just to pay for her stay. She later went to another school, Rockingham Academy, where she still worked while trying to study. It was here that she had her first serious boyfriend, a trumpet player named Ray Sterling. He encouraged her to focus more on her studies. In 1922, Joan tried to attend Stevens College in Missouri. She told them she was born in 1906, although her real birth year was likely earlier. But she stayed in college for only a few months. She realized she wasn't ready. With her family's troubles and all the moving around, her education never went very far, but her passion for performing never died. Even with all these struggles, Joan Crawford kept pushing forward, and what happened next took her one step closer to Hollywood. From chorus girl to movie star. Joan's journey to fame began when she started dancing in traveling shows under her birth name, Lucille LeSueur. While performing in Detroit, a producer named Jacob J. Schubert noticed her talent and gave her a job in a Broadway show called Innocent Eyes in 1924. It was here that she met a saxophone player named James Welton. Some reports say they even got married that same year, although Joan never spoke about it later in her life. But dancing on Broadway wasn't enough for Joan. She wanted something bigger. She looked for more work and approached Niels Granlund, a publicist for Loew's Theaters. He helped her get a small job with a singer named Harry Richman, and also arranged a screen test for her. That test ended up in the hands of Harry Raff, a Hollywood producer. On Christmas Eve 1924, Raff offered her a contract with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, MGM, for $75 a week. Joan borrowed money to travel to Hollywood, and that's where her film career began. At first, her roles were very small. Her first movie, Lady of the Night in 1925, didn't even show her face because she was only a body double for the famous actress Norma Shearer. She also had tiny parts in The Circle, Pretty Ladies, and other silent films that same year. But there was one problem. Her name, MGM's publicity head, Pete Smith, thought Lucille LeSueur sounded too much like the word sewer. So he held a contest in a movie magazine to let the public pick a better name for her. The winning name was Joan Crawford. Even though she didn't like the last name and thought it sounded like crawfish, she accepted it because it gave her a new identity and security in Hollywood. But Joan didn't want to stay in the background forever. She began promoting herself in every way possible. She went to dances all over Hollywood, especially where casting agents might notice her. She entered dance contests and wowed the crowds with the Charleston and the Black Bottom dances. Her plan worked. In 1925, she got her first noticeable role in a film called Sally, Irene, and Mary. This was just the beginning. But Joan's rise wasn't without competition. MGM's top actress at the time was Norma Shearer, who also happened to be married to the studio's production head, Irving Thalberg. This gave Shearer a lot of power. Crawford once famously said, "How can I compete with Norma? She sleeps with the boss." Despite this, Joan kept working hard. In 1926, she was named one of the Wampus Baby Stars, a list that included young actresses who were expected to become big stars. That same year, she starred in Paris, and soon she became the romantic lead for some of Hollywood's most popular male actors. Still, bigger things were waiting for her. The rise of a flapper icon. Joan Crawford's big break came in 1928 with Our Dancing Daughters, where she played a lively, modern young woman named Diana Medford. This role made her the face of the Roaring Twenties flapper, bold, glamorous, and independent. While other stars like Clara Bow also played flappers, Joan brought something deeper. She showed not only fun and freedom, but also a touch of sadness and strength. Even famous writer F. Scott Fitzgerald praised her as the perfect example of the modern woman, describing her as someone you might find laughing in a nightclub, but with sadness in her eyes. Joan herself said it best, "If you want to see the girl next door, go next door." She wasn't trying to play it safe. She wanted to stand out. Before this breakthrough, Joan had been working hard to prove herself. In The Unknown, 1927, she acted alongside Lon Chaney Sr., learning from one of Hollywood's great actors. She also appeared in Spring Fever with her friend William Haynes. These early roles gave her valuable experience, and by 1928, she was starring opposite leading men like Ramon Novarro and John Gilbert in films like Across to Singapore. Audiences loved her flapper characters, which spoke to young women craving more fun and freedom in their own lives. But Joan's success didn't come easily. She promoted herself relentlessly, entering dance contests, and working harder than anyone else to build her career. Over time, she rose from small parts to one of MGM's brightest stars. Yet, behind the scenes, her personal life was already becoming complicated, and the film industry itself was about to face a huge change. Rising higher, then falling fast. The late 1920s marked the end of silent films and the rise of talking pictures. Many silent stars struggled to adapt, but Joan wasn't one of them. Determined to succeed, she worked hard on her speaking voice, practicing daily with newspapers and books. In 1929, she appeared in the Hollywood Review, showing off her singing skills. Soon after, she starred in her first major sound film, Untamed, where critics said she sounded nervous, but fans still loved her. By the early 1930s, Joan's career kept soaring. She starred in popular movies like Montana Moon and Our Blushing Brides, gradually moving from flapper roles to more serious characters. In 1931, she teamed up with Clark Gable for 3 big hits: Dance, Fools, Dance, Laughing Sinners, and Possessed. By 1932, she was part of the star-studded cast of Grand Hotel, which won Best Picture at the Academy Awards. That same year, she starred in Letty Linton, a film famous for its fashion, even though it was pulled from theaters over legal issues. Despite some failures like Rain, Joan stayed near the top of Hollywood's box office rankings. But change was coming. In 1937, after years of success, her popularity suddenly dropped. Though Life magazine called her the first queen of the movies, she slipped from 7th to 16th in box office rankings. Theater owners even labeled her box office poison in 1938, claiming her movies weren't making enough money for what she was being paid. She wasn't alone. Big names like Greta Garbo and Katharine Hepburn were also on the list. Joan didn't quit. In 1939, she staged a comeback in The Women, where she boldly played a villain opposite her longtime rival, Norma Shearer. She took on grittier roles, such as in Strange Cargo and A Woman's Face, showing a new side of herself that critics respected. But despite these efforts, Joan sensed her time at MGM was coming to an end. After 18 years at the studio that had made her a star, she asked to be released from her contract. On June 29, 1943, Joan Crawford walked away from MGM, closing one chapter but ready to begin another. Winning an Oscar and fading from the spotlight. Joan Crawford didn't stay without a studio for long. In July 1943, she signed a $500,000 contract with Warner Brothers for 3 films. Her first movie there was Hollywood Canteen, 1944. A film full of celebrity cameos meant to boost the spirits of World War II troops. But her biggest success came in 1945, when she fought to play the lead in Mildred Pierce. The film's director, Michael Curtis, originally wanted Barbara Stanwyck for the part. He made Joan audition for the role. She agreed and proved herself. The movie became a huge hit, and Joan won the Academy Award for Best Actress. Her career was back on top. After Mildred Pierce, she starred in Humoresque, 1946, with John Garfield, and Possessed, 1947, with Van Heflin, for which she received another Oscar nomination. She also played leading roles in Daisy Kenyon, Flamingo Road, and The Damned Don't Cry. In these films, she often played strong women facing difficult situations. By 1950, she was making fewer movies, but her performances still had power. After This Woman is Dangerous in 1952, she left Warner Brothers and continued working for other studios. That same year, she earned her 3rd Oscar nomination for Sudden Fear, but her career was starting to slow down. Joan turned her focus to other things. In 1955, she married Alfred Steele, the president of Pepsi-Cola. After his death in 1959, she took his place on the Pepsi board of directors and stayed there until 1973, when she was forced to retire. She kept acting in movies and TV through the 1960s, but her roles became fewer and her fame began to fade. In 1970, she starred in the horror movie Trog, her final film. After that, she retired from acting completely. In her later years, Joan Crawford became more private and rarely appeared in public. She spent the last years of her life alone, away from the spotlight. And this quiet ending surprised many people who remembered her as one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. But before we talk about that, let's take a closer look at her personal life. The marriages that made headlines. Joan Crawford's personal life was as dramatic as her movies. She first married Douglas Fairbanks Jr. on June 3, 1929. The wedding was a secret, and it happened in a church in New York. But their marriage was a shock to Hollywood. Fairbanks Jr. was the son of 2 of the biggest stars in Hollywood, Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford. They didn't like this sudden marriage at all. For 8 months, they didn't even invite the couple to their famous home, Pickfair. Slowly, things got better between Crawford and Fairbanks Sr. He started calling her Billy, a name from her childhood, and she called him Uncle Doug. But even then, Crawford often felt left out. When the Fairbanks men played golf, she was either alone or stuck with Pickford, who didn't spend much time with her. After some years, the marriage broke down. Crawford divorced Fairbanks Jr. in 1933, saying he was jealous, and they argued about small things all night long. 2 years later, in 1935, Crawford married actor Francho Tone. He was more interested in theater than movies. They even built a small theater in their home and invited friends like Clark Gable, to watch plays. At first, Crawford helped Tone with his career. But Tone didn't want to be a big movie star. He just wanted to act. Their marriage also suffered because they couldn't have children. Crawford had 2 miscarriages, and Tone started drinking. Sadly, he became violent, and they divorced in 1939. Even though their marriage ended, they stayed friends. Tony later even asked Crawford to marry him again in 1964, but she said no. When Tone died in 1968, Crawford made sure his ashes were scattered at Muskoka Lakes in Canada. In 1942, Crawford married Philip Terry just 6 weeks after meeting him, but their relationship didn't last either. They separated in 1945 and divorced in 1946, again citing cruelty. Her final marriage was to Alfred Steele, the president of Pepsi-Cola, in 1955. They married in Las Vegas. Unlike her other marriages, this one lasted until Steele's death in 1959. He became the stepfather to her children, and, for the first time, Crawford seemed to have found some peace at home. But even with Steele, her life was far from quiet. So what was Joan Crawford like as a mother? Well, her children had some very different stories to tell. The children's painful memories. Joan Crawford adopted her first child, Christina, in 1940. Because she was single, she had to adopt from outside California. She found Christina through an agency in Las Vegas. Christina's mother was a young, unmarried woman. At first, Crawford called the baby Joan, but later changed her name to Christina. Later, while married to Philip Terry, Crawford adopted a boy. He was born as Marcus Gary Kohlberg, but they named him Christopher. Sadly, his adoption was full of trouble. His birth mother, Rebecca, tried to blackmail Crawford after learning her son was adopted by a celebrity. Crawford returned the child. But after the boy suffered terrible abuse from his birth family, Rebecca put him back up for adoption. Crawford never forgot losing him, and it remained a painful topic all her life. After that heartbreak, Crawford and Terry adopted another boy and named him Philip Terry Jr. When she divorced Terry, she renamed the boy Christopher Crawford. This Christopher caused trouble too. He ran away from home many times and was expelled from schools. Later, he joined a military academy. At just 18, he married and soon had a daughter. He once took his newborn to meet Crawford. She held the baby briefly and said, "I'm nobody's grandmother. I'm Aunt Joan." Then she handed the baby back. In another heartbreaking moment, Christopher's second daughter was born with serious health problems. He called Crawford for help. She coldly replied, "She's not my granddaughter. You were adopted." That was the last time he spoke to her. In 1947, Crawford adopted twin girls named Kathy and Cynthia. Their mother died shortly after they were born, and Crawford raised them herself. Kathy remembered her mother as warm and wise. She later married and had children of her own. Cynthia also married and had kids but died in 2007. Kathy lived until 2020, but not all the children remembered Crawford kindly. Christina later wrote a book called Mommy Dearest, where she described Crawford as abusive. She said Crawford once came close to her face with anger in her eyes, making her fear for her life. But Kathy disagreed and called their mother the best anyone could have. Christina believed that Kathy had a different experience because she was younger and easier to raise. Christina said, "What my mother wanted was fans and puppies, not human beings." Christopher also said Crawford never cared for him. Clearly, life behind closed doors was much darker than it seemed on the red carpet. But Joan Crawford's battles didn't end at home. She also had a fierce enemy in Hollywood itself. A feud that shook Hollywood. Joan Crawford's rivalry with actress Bette Davis was one of the most famous in Hollywood history. It started in the 1930s when Davis's career was rising and Crawford's divorce stole the headlines. This hurt Davis's film, Ex-Lady, which failed at the box office. From then on, the two women competed over everything: roles, awards, and fame. Crawford later married a man Davis had worked with on screen, adding fuel to the fire. The rivalry reached its peak in 1962. Both women starred in the horror movie Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Davis was nominated for an Oscar, but Crawford was not. Crawford acted supportive in public, saying, "I always knew Bette would be chosen, and I hope and pray that she wins." But Davis didn't believe a word of it. She later said Crawford secretly worked behind the scenes to hurt her chances. According to Davis, Crawford even called the other nominees and offered to accept the award on their behalf if they couldn't attend the ceremony. On Oscar night, when Anne Bancroft won but couldn't be there, Crawford stepped on stage and accepted the award for her. Davis later recalled how Crawford walked past her with a triumphant look on her face. Crawford's smile seemed to say, "You didn't win, and I am elated." The two women never made peace. Davis once joked that she would only attend Crawford's funeral if she could make sure the coffin was nailed shut. But the battles didn't stop with Davis. Crawford's own children had plenty to fight with her about too. And some of those fights lasted until the very end. The fight between Joan Crawford and Bette Davis was personal. Davis once said she didn't want Crawford sleeping with their movie director because she feared he would give Crawford more close-up shots. The tension between them made filming Whatever Happened to Baby Jane even harder. Behind the scenes, they fought over dressing rooms, screen time, and everything else. Their feud lasted decades. Even when Davis's career was peaking and Crawford's was fading, they still found reasons to fight. They were both powerful women in a time when Hollywood didn't welcome strong-minded actresses. Neither woman wanted to give up the spotlight. When one succeeded, the other felt the sting of defeat. But time finally ended their rivalry. Crawford died in 1977, and Davis followed years later. Only death could end their competition. The final years of Joan Crawford. In 1970, Joan Crawford stood proudly on stage as John Wayne gave her the famous Cecil B. DeMille Award. This was during the Golden Globes held at the Coconut Grove in Los Angeles. It was a special moment, showing that even in her later years, Hollywood still respected her. That same year, she visited Stevens College in Missouri, the place where she had studied briefly back in 1922. People listened closely as she shared stories from her life. But this was not the only time Crawford opened up about herself. In 1962, she published her first autobiography called A Portrait of Joan, where she told her story in her own words. Later, in 1971, she released another book called My Way of Life, where she shared her thoughts on living, working, and surviving in Hollywood. But soon, the appearances became fewer. Joan Crawford's last big public moment came on April 8, 1973. She was the guest of honor at an event in New York City called Legendary Ladies. People filled every seat in the 500-seat theater, watching clips from her most famous films. When she finally stepped on stage, the audience couldn't stop cheering. She took questions from the crowd and left the stage like a true star. But even outside, fans surrounded her car, refusing to let her leave right away. They didn't want the moment to end. After this, Crawford slowly stepped out of the spotlight. She moved into a smaller apartment in 1973, still in the same New York building, but her life was much quieter. In September 1974, she made one last appearance at a book party in the Rainbow Room. Sadly, newspapers published unkind photos of her from that night. That was the last time the public saw Joan Crawford. The sad goodbye of Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford's story came to an end on May 10, 1977. She passed away from a heart attack in her New York apartment. She was 69 years old. Just a few days before her death, on May 6th, she gave away her beloved dog, Princess Lotus Blossom, because she felt too weak to care for her anymore. It was a quiet, lonely moment that showed how frail she had become. Her funeral was held on May 13th at Campbell Funeral Home in Manhattan. It was a private event, much smaller than people expected for someone so famous. Only about 75 people attended. Some wondered why it was such a small gathering, but the truth was simple. Joan's children and a few close friends wanted to keep it private. Even though the media made it seem like no one cared, that wasn't true. Her children, Kathy, Cindy, and Christopher, were there, along with friends from the film world and Pepsi-Cola, the company where her last husband, Alfred Steele, had worked. Interestingly, Joan's estranged daughter, Christina, who later wrote the book Mommy Dearest, did not attend. But another family member, her niece Joan Crawford Lowe Fuller, was there. The funeral itself was simple and peaceful. Joan's children asked that the ceremony follow Christian Science beliefs, a religion Crawford had followed. There were no fancy decorations or public speeches, just a quiet farewell to a woman who had once been the Queen of Hollywood. But this was not the only goodbye. On May 17th, a much larger memorial service was held at All Souls Unitarian Church in New York City. About 550 people attended. This event was organized by Pepsi-Cola and included many famous faces. Actress Anita Luce, actor Cliff Robertson, and actress Geraldine Brooks gave heartfelt speeches. Singer Pearl Bailey moved the crowd with her beautiful performance of the hymn, "He'll Understand." It was a touching goodbye to a woman who had spent her life in the spotlight. But not everything ended peacefully. When Crawford's will was read on May 17th at the Drake Hotel, it caused shockwaves. Crawford left most of her $2 million estate to her charities and some close friends. She gave money to causes like the American Cancer Society, the Muscular Dystrophy Association, and the Motion Picture and Television Country House. She also left $77,500 to each of her youngest daughters, Cindy and Kathy, and smaller amounts to her secretary, Betty Barker, and a few others. But the biggest surprise was this. She left nothing to Christina and Christopher. In her will, she clearly stated, "It is my intention to make no provision herein for my son Christopher or my daughter, Christina, for reasons which are well known to them." Christina and Christopher later fought the will in court and eventually received a $55,000 settlement each. The quiet burial and the last goodbye. After the funeral, Joan Crawford's ashes were placed in a crypt at Ferncliff Cemetery in New York. She was laid to rest beside her fourth husband, Alfred Steele. Their shared resting place marked the end of her long, dramatic life. Though many people expected a grand Hollywood farewell, Crawford's burial was simple. There were no cameras, no red carpets, just peace and quiet. But even after her death, the mystery around Crawford didn't end. People still asked, why was her funeral so small? The truth was, it was exactly how her family wanted it. Simple, private, and respectful. The media loved to stir up stories, but the facts showed something else. Crawford's children, even with all their ups and downs, came to say goodbye. And while Christina stayed away, perhaps because of their painful past, the others stood by their mother one last time. There was also one surprising guest at the funeral. Joan Crawford Lowe Fuller, the daughter of Joan's estranged brother, Hal. She was the only remaining blood relative who showed up. While Crawford's family life was complicated and full of drama, moments like this showed that family ties, no matter how strained, sometimes still mattered. In the end. In the days after the funeral, the media continued to follow the story. On May 18th, Crawford's will was officially submitted to court. It was also revealed that her estate executor asked to open her 2 safe deposit boxes, probably looking for personal papers or valuables. By May 19th, headlines announced the final shock. Christina and Christopher had been cut out of their mother's will. The world watched, wondering how a woman who had given so much to Hollywood could leave her family in such turmoil. But for those who knew her best, Joan Crawford was always a woman of strong choices, whether on screen or in life. In the end, even her farewell was on her own terms, quiet, private, and filled with both sadness and mystery.